Afreximbank TV.
All right, to continue this conversation, we're joined by Dr. Pamela Coke-Hamilton, the Executive Director of the International Trade Center. Dr. Coke-Hamilton, thank you so much for taking the time to join us, especially after having 3 hours of sleep you mentioned in your, in your remarks. In your remarks too, you spoke about the umbilical and organic ties that the Caribbean shares with the African region. Tell me a little bit about how you believe those existing ties could help us to achieve the objectives that we're trying to set out today.
Well, I think one of the great things about trade is always built on comity and trust. And if you go back centuries, it is always that people have something which they feel they have in common with the next person. And trade is built on that. And what Africa and the Caribbean have is organic. And therefore there's a natural ability to begin to trade on the basis of those similarities, whether they be 400 years ago or now. And so for me, the idea of an African-Caribbean trade agreement or trade arrangement, it doesn't have to be full scope, it could be partial scope, is a really important way to change the narrative for both our regions. And that is what's important for us. How do we do that? And how do we put in place the mechanisms to make sure that that happens?
Yeah.
So.
Right. You mentioned earlier that there were some challenges with us achieving those.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about those. You talked
challenges.
about supply chain,
Yes.
the logistics and all of
Yes.
that.
A lot, of course, goes back to the issue of how trade was established in both our regions, intra-regionally and between the regions. So essentially, we still have a kind of post-colonial construct that trade between Africa, within Africa, is one of the lowest in the world. It is now 14%, as opposed to in Europe, 60%. Intra-African trade needs to be built up in order for Africa to thrive. And this is what the essence of the AfCFTA is about, because it is a $22 billion market. Why can't it then basically export to itself? It's a big enough market to absorb the goods. It's a big enough market to pay for the goods and services. And so in the same way, the Caribbean also has significant challenges internally, as you were explaining, having to go to Miami from Guyana to Charlotte to get here. And so how do we address the logistics challenges? That's a significant problem. If we're going to talk about trade, a huge issue is going to be logistics. How do you get, whether it's the goods or the services, to the consumer? The second issue is the level of tariffs that have been imposed. Unfortunately, the tariffs imposed on goods both from the Caribbean or from Africa, are substantially higher than the tariffs that we apply to other trading partners. Why? Even worse, the tariffs on primary products are then quadrupled when those products are processed, which means there's no incentive to move up the value chain and increase the processing. And that is a problem. So it's looking at how do we address those challenges directly, how do we address the challenges of logistics, of moving from primary commodity production, from looking at tariffs and non-tariff barriers, and so on.
Yeah, and the conversations are taking place here, and
Yes.
I suppose this is where it all starts. But how do we move from just having the conversations and then taking action, and so that the political will?
Well, this is where institutions come in. The power of institutions. So you have the CARICOM Secretariat that's in charge of negotiations for CARICOM, and also CARIFORUM, which includes the Dominican Republic. That's one institution. Then you have, of course, the AfCFTA Secretariat, you have the AU, and you have Afreximbank as part of the whole triad. Once those two institutions have the mandate to go ahead and begin to put in place very specific modalities to have the conversation. As I said, it doesn't have to be full scope. It can be partial scope. It can be very focused on a few areas. So for example, ITC has already done one study in 2022 that talked about the fact that there was a $1.2 billion potential. Now it's up to 1.8 per year by 2028. And in addition, what ITC has found is that if we begin to look at five specific value chains, that show high potential between Africa and the Caribbean and begin to really drill down to the elements of that. That will be the basis upon which we start to discuss a fulsome agreement.
Yeah, and that brings me to my next question about what are some of the highest potential areas that you see either from your study or
Sure.
at the level of the ITC?
Well, from our study, there are a few. There's, of course, minerals. Looking at, for example, the biggest export from the Caribbean is ammonia fertilizer from Trinidad. Right, and from Africa to the Caribbean, it's petroleum products and so on. So that's one area. The second area is looking at wood, plastics, paper. Yep. That's another huge opportunity that we're going to be looking at. The third area is agribusiness, and we all know how much both regions delve into agribusiness, and also the familiarity in terms of our food, in terms of our processing, in terms of our products. And there's a natural synergy there. The fourth is, of course, looking at, in my view, the creative industries. Mm-hmm. I think that is a huge opportunity, which we tend to take for granted because we just do it. Yeah. You know?
It's so natural to us.
Yes, we just do music, we just do fashion, but we don't see it as a business.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the formation of the Pan-African Fashion Alliance that Dr. Arama is sponsoring through Afreximbank, and ITC has done the preliminary study on that, is a great opportunity for us, I think. So those are some of the value chains that we want to begin to drill down on and begin to formulate very clear objectives and deliverables.
Awesome. You, in your remarks too, you spoke of the One Africa program.
Yes, the One Trade Africa program.
One Trade Africa program. Tell us a little bit about the work at the level of ITC and even your collaborations with Afreximbank to be able to support this idea of
Sure. The One Trade Africa program has been premised on the reality that we have been doing work in Africa for a long time. We're present in 50 states in Africa. Out of the 55. And we have been doing work since our inception 60 years ago. It has increased exponentially in the last 10 to 15 years. And so we decided what we needed was a platform that would, in a sense, encapsulate the entire process. Rather than ad hoc piecemeal engagement, we now have a full platform that addresses all the issues. So we work with the regional economic commissions. We also do a lot of work directly with countries. So we're present in Uganda, Kenya, Ghana, you name it, we're there. Right. We're working on various areas. So we're working on agribusiness, we're looking on climate smart agriculture, we're working on cocoa and coffee. So these are all part of what we do as part of the One Trade Africa program. In addition to which we work with the AfCFTA funded and partnership with Afreximbank on how to export under the AfCFTA. Because it's one thing to promulgate, an agreement. As we know, it's a completely different thing to use it. And so one of the elements that we've done, I think we've trained over 40,000 SMEs so far on how to actually utilize this potential agreement to begin to trade within Africa. So those are some of the things that we do. And as I mentioned before, the Pan-African Fashion Alliance, we're also working to see possibility of this free trade area between the Caribbean and Africa. And we have great partnerships with Afreximbank on so many areas. So we're very happy.
Awesome. All right, so in closing, I'd like to chat with you a little bit about your expectations. I know we have the program and the agenda, but in terms of for the ITC yourself, what is a takeaway you're hoping to see that come out of this?
I think, well, my dream takeaway
and then realistic
and then the realistic, exactly, the levels, right? So the dream takeaway would be to launch the an FTA trial. Yeah. A kind of test case, right? Just to begin to look at the mechanics of it and say what could work, how it could work, what's the best way to set it up. So in other words, a kind of
a blueprint of sorts.
Yes, an analysis. Yeah. So that would be the dream. The second level would be, how do we begin, even if we can't get to an FTA, how do we begin to exploit those specific value chains which we have identified as potentially very profitable for both sides? And then do the work so that the next time we meet, we can actually present very clear, viable opportunities for business and investment.
Yeah.
So that's what I would like.
An intentionality on the parts of everyone who's here.
Exactly.
Awesome. Thank you so much,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Coke-Hamilton.
Thank you so much.